Fighter combat balance has changed substantially over the course of Star Citizen's life due to the adjusting of flight handling via the IFCS and weapons properties. Significant flight changes were made in patches 1.3, 2.0, 2.6 and another major rework is coming for 3.5. Each of these IFCS changes have had pros and cons with varying degrees of acceptance from the community. Weapon balance has also been in constant flux, with one weapon type or another being dominant, sometimes to the point that people give up if they don't have access to those weapons. I believe a true litmus test of how the community feels about fighter combat is the population of Arena Commander. Because Arena Commander is focused on ship combat, racing and not much else, when the majority of the active population feels good about how fighters fight and racers race, the Arena Commander population grows and tournaments are planned. When the active population doesn't feel good about flight, both competitive play and general participation in Arena Commander shrinks. Backers who have had the opportunity to fly the differing IFCS tunings over the game's lifetime have their favourites because of the differing styles of racing or combat that each brings. As balance is tweaked during each patch, the separate aspects of a fight must be tuned to give the best experience for the player. To get combat balance right, the designers need to take into account weapon damage, which is made up of damage over time, alpha damage and shield penetration, shield strength and regeneration, hull and armor health or hit points, agility, speed and the ability to disengage via IFCS tuning, and power and heat management systems. All of these individually important properties tie into each other, and good balance is dependent upon each being tuned for those interactions. For weapons to be both differentiated and balanced in a way that feels both fun and fair, DPS should not be the first consideration in their design. Differentiation is important for fun gameplay and interesting builds, and CIG is right to make weapons that provide different behaviours and advantages for different situations. Unfortunately, their approach thus far has felt DPS centric and often led to problems. Why is damage per second a bad way to balance different weapons that are the same size? Let's run through an example. If two weapons are configured to do an identical 40 DPS, one being a repeater with a rate of fire 4 times per second or 2400 damage per minute, while the other is a cannon that can only fire once per second, these two weapons are not equal or well balanced. The repeater has to land 4 projectiles to achieve 40 damage that the cannon can do with a single hit. This makes the cannon potentially far more effective than the repeater when the window to hit the target is a fraction of a second, or when the target would have been disabled by a massive alpha strike of damage. Only one trigger pull is needed to do full damage, and the repeater would need to do a full second of firing to deal its maximum 40 DPS. In the above example, the repeater may still be substantially more powerful when the targeting window is long, as you are easily able to spray wildly and do partial damage even to a skilled, evasive pilot. But when weapon types are balanced this way, you get what can be seen as the current cannon tuning. Cannon damage per shot is so high in order to match the repeater DPS that ships can be destroyed in 1 or 2 cannon volleys. This is obviously not interesting gameplay for a dogfight or what most players would consider balanced. To better differentiate weapons, functionality should be tuned consisting of a combination of damage per projectile, how many of these will kill a target, how much ammunition does your ship carry, weapon rated maximum rate of fire. How does this translate into traditional DPS calculation against a big target that will take a lot of time to kill? How much burst damage is possible if the rate of fire is very high and if all the shots hit the target over a short period of time? Projectile velocity, or how likely the target is to be able to dodge the shot. Projectile spread, how many shots won't go where they're supposed to go if the target stays away. Damage type, how is this weapon specialised to do damage to shields or armour. And complex rate of fire limiters such as heat generation and power draw. Arbitrary limiters such as introducing a delay between trigger pull and firing or attempting to force nonsensical semi-automatic behaviour at best only causes frustration in dynamic fighter combat and at worst encourages those in the know to use simple macros to bypass the mechanic. These unintuitive, generally ineffective limiters should be completely avoided. Ammunition. Ammunition capacity is an obvious limit to the amount of damage that the weapon is able to cause directly by limiting the maximum number of times the player can fire their weapon. This is effective for calculating the total damage the weapon may output, but is ineffective as a metric for judging a weapon's effectiveness in short fights, or when ammo is provided by Arena Commander power-ups. Heat and power. Heat and power are very similar systems, with both able to provide many of the same effects for the purpose of game balance. They force the player to choose which system or weapons can be leaned upon the most heavily in combat, and which can only be used sparingly. Innate to both systems is forced choice. If heat or power management do not force the player to make hard choices, the systems are not an effective balancing mechanic. Juggling power and heat priorities can be extremely compelling gameplay, particularly for a co-pilot in multi-crew ships, if the UI is intuitive. And juggling priorities does not completely negate the need to make difficult choices.
Rather than the player having to control both heat and power directly,
my proposal is that each weapon's default rate of heat up and cool down time would be set by the weapon's stats, when the additional cooling would be set by the power setting on the power triangle being biased towards weapons. This would allow each weapon to be balanced to suit the intent of the design within the boundaries of the weapon's size limits, without the external influence of other ship systems. Players can affect how quickly they want their weapons to cool off by sacrificing other systems such as shields or thrusters through power allocation. Additional weapon attribute tweaks could be made through modifications on the tuning bench in the hangar. This could be things like mechanism lightning to allow for a slight increase in rate of fire at the expense of rapid heat buildup or increased wear, for example. This system would replace the current button press overclock system. Shields and penetration. Shield regeneration on fighters should never be so fast that lower damage projectiles cannot apply enough damage quickly enough to bring the shields down before they can regenerate. At the same time, shield penetrating weapons will always be favoured when the downsides of their use are minimal or absent. Shield penetration needs to be balanced with severe downsides, or they will always be the meta when all other things are equal. Hull and armour. Hull and armour need to be taken into account for how long it takes to bring down each ship. Too high and small weapons become useless, and too low and fighters feel too fragile. Small ships with lower mass should trade armour for agility and smaller shield generators. The advantage of being light and agile is that there is more chance to move out of the way of the incoming fire rather than tanking the damage. IFCS. As I have said before in my flight dynamics video, flight needs to be tuned to make combat a skill that is easy to learn but hard to master. Rotation rate, speed, acceleration and jerk all need to be tuned to suit each particular ship based on its size and role. Another massive part of the damage equation is how well ships manoeuvre. This obviously ties into the flight model, ship's mass, role and tuning. When manoeuvrability is too low, fighters will find it difficult to manoeuvre out of the attacking ship's firing solution, causing a DPS race, where generally the ship with the most DPS will win if all other things are equal. When agility is too high, the requirement for the attacking pilot to think strategically and find the best position is reduced, as they can correct any mistakes so quickly that there is little consequence. Another consequence of the extreme manoeuvrability is that it reduces the window available for the pilot to hit their target, making lower damage per projectile weapons like repeaters less viable over the current cannons. This makes fighter combat look odd, with flick shots being the only reliable way to hit your target. Fighters should need to manoeuvre into a position where they have an advantage and are able to damage their opponent's ship while making it difficult for their opponents to return fire. This style of manoeuvre fighting was far more prevalent during 2.5 and earlier patches. Just like fighters, racers need to be agile enough that they are in control while feeling thrilling and skillful. Cost. Cost of ownership should never be considered a balance point for ships, weapons, ammunition or components. When in combat, most of the time it is a case of kill or be killed. In that situation, cost is irrelevant, especially in a game like Star Citizen where the stakes are high. Anybody will pay what it takes to come out on top. In a game where large numbers of players can pool their resources through organisations, they will always buy the best, no matter the cost. This metric will therefore only disadvantage the new player. All aspects of combat need to be taken into account during balancing. Smaller ships should have higher acceleration to remain agile, but overall have lower damage immediately available. Larger ships should be less agile and tankier, with potentially higher damage weapons. Speed should be based on the role of the ship type more than the size. That isn't to say that these properties are all set in stone, only that every positive aspect of a ship or item should have some negative balance to it. Thus far, CIG has largely attempted to balance combat reactively, which result in there constantly being limited number of viable weapons loadouts, a limited number of competitively viable ships, and, since 2.6, decreasing number of viable tactics to use during combat. Many recent changes to weapon functions seem to be born of an FPS-style gunplay rather than aerial combat, showing a severe disconnect between how combat plays out fighter to fighter. No one fix or even set of fixes will correct this. The only way to make fighter combat truly engaging is to rework all aspects holistically. IFCS tuning, weapons attributes, UI, gameplay systems and even quantum travel. Everything related to ship combat from the ground up. To address this, a dedicated flight combat team should be formed in the same way that FPS team exists, with a singular, clear, understood vision of what fighter combat should look like. This team would need to have the time, resources and reach to do it right. They must have veto power over anything that affects ship-to-ship combat from as early as concept to ensure that any addition either falls into the currently defined role, size or type of ship, weapon or component and doesn't break balance. This team should publish weapons and ship role definitions and properties for designers to follow, and not be fenced off from mechanics that affect combat, such as previously mentioned systems like heat, power, fuel and even quantum travel. All of it matters and needs to be integrated into one proactive, cohesive strategy for making combat fun. CIG's developers need to all sing from the same sheet of music when it comes to fighter combat, from the directors to the QA staff, to ensure that combat becomes truly engaging, satisfying and fun. Good hunting, pilots.